Hi, and welcome to this introduction to the Swedish language. My name is Adam, and I'll be your teacher. Alright, Swedish is the native language of about 9 million people. It is the sole official language of Sweden, one of the 2 official languages of Finland, and one of the 24 official languages of the European Union. In Sweden, Swedish is spoken natively by between 85 and 95% of the population. We don't really know the exact number because for some reason the Swedish government isn't interested in knowing what languages people speak at home. What we do know, however, is that among the people who don't speak Swedish natively, virtually all of them speak it as a second language. In Finland, things look a bit different. Here, Swedish is spoken natively by about 5.5% of the population. But this doesn't mean that if you travel around Finland, 1 in every 20 people you run into is going to be a Swedish speaker. No. In fact, the native speakers of Swedish are concentrated to the coastal areas of Finland, where they make up a significant part of the population. In these areas, municipalities are bilingual, and many have a Swedish-speaking majority. On the map, areas where Swedish is a minority language are shown in light blue, and areas where it is the majority language are in darker blue. There is even areas that are unilingual, with Swedish as the only language. These areas are the Åland Islands, as well as 3 municipalities in the northwestern Ostrobothnia province. Since Swedish is one of the national languages of Finland, all Finnish kids study Swedish in school. As a result, 43% of non-Swedish speaking Finns consider themselves able to hold a conversation in the language. 5% use Swedish on a daily basis, and another 11% claim to use the language often, but not every day. Now, let's move on to the country of Estonia. Here, Swedish is not an official language, so why am I bringing it up? Well, the answer is that Swedish used to be spoken there. Like Finland, the Swedish language was spoken on the coast and along the archipelago. The light blue areas represent areas where Swedish was spoken about 200 years ago, and in dark blue you see where it was spoken more recently. Also like in Finland, several areas were unilingual. Examples of this are the islands of Ormsö and Runo. The Swedish-speaking minority remained in Estonia until 1944, when the Soviet Union invaded the country for the second time during World War II. Most of the Estonian Swedish speakers fled across the Baltic Sea to seek refuge in Sweden. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, many Estonian Swedes returned, and in modern Estonia, the Swedish-speaking population has been named a national historical minority and been given cultural autonomy. The number of actual Swedish speakers in present-day Estonia, however, is pretty much negligible. Swedish is written with a Latin alphabet, with the addition of 3 extra letters at the end. The letters Q, W, and Z are only used in proper names and foreign words. The extra letters, O, Ä, and Ö, are not perceived by Swedish speakers as 2 A's and an O with accents on them, but rather as very distinct letters. To a Swedish speaker, the letter O, for instance, is no more just an A with a circle than, say, capital R is just a P with an extra line, or H is an N with a longer vertical stroke. Treating the extra letters as variants of A and O is a recipe for misunderstanding, and for a Swedish speaker, completely baffling. As you can see in these examples, if you change the letter, you change the word. Relationship-wise, Swedish is a Germanic language of the northern branch. This means that it's closely related to languages such as Norwegian, Danish, and Icelandic, and more distantly to Dutch, German, and English, who all belong to the western branch of Germanic. And just like all Germanic languages, it's also very distantly related to other Indo-European languages such as French, Spanish, Russian, Greek, and Hindi, although these relationships are usually not very noticeable. The languages most closely related to Swedish, unsurprisingly, are Norwegian and Danish. These 3 languages are considered to be mutually intelligible, which means that the speaker of one language can understand speakers of the other 2. As an illustration of this, here are the numbers 1 to 10 in the 3 languages. They do remind you of one another, right? A Swedish speaker can often understand Danish, and particularly Norwegian, without too much difficulty, especially if they're written. Spoken Danish is the hardest for a Swedish speaker to understand, because the pronunciation of Danish has diverged so much from both Swedish and Norwegian. The truth of all of this might vary a bit. Usually it all depends on what dialect a person is speaking and how familiar they are with the other two languages, but it's true enough as a general rule. Now, a typical Swedish speaker is not able to understand Icelandic, Dutch, or German, neither spoken nor written. But, because the languages share a lot of grammatical structures and core vocabulary, a Swedish speaker will have an advantage when trying to learn them, and vice versa. Here are the numbers 1 to 10 in these languages for comparison. You immediately notice that they don't share the same level of similarity as the other three at all. As for the grammar, let's look at some distinctive features of Swedish. First of all, the definite article, the in English, is not a separate word, but actually a suffix attached to the end of a word. For example, take the English words dog and cat. In Swedish, these are hund and katt. The definite forms are hunden and katten. Notice how the English word the so neatly corresponds to the Swedish n suffix in these words. This is a very typical thing going on in the Scandinavian languages. In Swedish, there's also two grammatical genders, common gender and neuter. This doesn't compare to English, as English lacks grammatical gender altogether. Think rather about the distinction between masculine and feminine found in languages like French and Spanish. That's pretty much what this is about. So, for example, in English we simply get a foot and a house, because there can never be any distinction. In Spanish, though, we have un pie and una casa, where one is masculine and the other feminine. This is just how it works in Swedish, and so we get en fot, but ett hus, because the former is common gender and the latter is neuter. Another typical feature is found in the verb. Let's have a look at one. Let's use run. In English, you get an S when you're talking about he, she, or it doing the running. Spanish takes this way further with a special form for every person. So, what does Swedish do? Well, actually, it doesn't do anything at all. Every person has the same form. Always. In that regard, Swedish is very simple. Instead, Swedish grammar often stresses the importance of word order and prosody, which in many cases will decide the meaning of a sentence. To round things up, I want to share a sample of Swedish so that you can get a longer passage of text to read and so that you can hear what it actually sounds like. I will read the first part of the short story, The Spring Tune, by Toby Jansson, the creator of the Moomin books. This story is part of the book Tales from Moomin Valley. In Swedish, this story is called Vårvisan. And don't forget to note the definite article attached to this word.
En lugn och molnfri kväll i slutet av april kom snusmumriken så långt norrut att snöfläckarna låg kvar på nordsidan. Han hade vandrat hela dagen genom orörda landskap och över sig hade han hela tiden hört flyttfåglarna ropa. De var också på väg hem söderifrån. Det hade varit lätt att gå för ryggsäcken var så gott som tom och det fanns ingenting som bekymrade honom. Han var lycklig med skogen och vädret och sig själv. Morgondagen och gårdagen var lika långt borta, men just nu lyste solen klarrött mellan björkarna och luften var sval och mild.
And that is the end of this video. Thank you for watching.